We were talking about how Fire Kasina is meditation on steroids.
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed, it was a difference between the first Fire Casino retreat I did and the last one, is that the first one I wasn't really good at kind of like letting go yet. And so I got like super kind of quite like edgy, unpleasant style concentration. For like, I think like too much efforting while I'm trying to perceive things, like kind of really pushing, trying to perceive the nimitta as some type of image or another, things like that. And then this time it was like way foot off the gas. And I was just like, it'll happen in time. It'll happen in time. And
yeah, exactly.
it's a lot more pleasant that way.
Yeah, I think it's also what they describe and what I experience as just intending to do things. So sometimes there can be a latency, but you basically just kind of make a mental statement or something like that, kind of like, let there be a square or let there be a triangle. And you're not really trying to like draw with your eyes or like with what you feel are your eyes or something like that to like burn into this background. But you're just kind of, setting an intention for there to appear something. And this can appear later or it can appear instantaneously. But this kind of level of no effort. I don't know. I think you described it quite well.
Yeah, I think that's the difference there is quite important, because it's, on one hand, a lot of that efforting when your concentration still isn't super hot yet, I think it actually kind of helps keep you engaged. So it sort of hurts, but also helps keep you engaged, which is a interesting combination. But I think then, especially once your concentration's better, the first retreat, I just kept doing that. And I got fairly edgy, and the other people on the retreat with me also got fairly edgy. And this time I didn't get so edgy. I got slightly paranoid, just a little bit, which I'm not sure this should actually be included in the recording. Maybe.
Yeah, go for it. I can tell you my paranoia.
It's okay. So here's my theory. It's like, once concentration gets to a certain point with this particular type of practice, it's like very much like that single pointed type thing, where it's interesting because I would notice that it's like my attention would be like frozen into some, like, perceiving some meditation object, and I'd have to kind of turn attention on this kind of contraction that seemed to be holding my attention in a certain place, actually, in order to free it up and actually to get kind of more let's say like transient attention, because otherwise it would just be super it would just like sit like held. It's like my attention was like frozen held on the nimitta or whatever I was perceiving there. And I think that when you go into kind of interacting with people off of this, because I did it at home, which was not totally ideal, but because I did it at home, it's like I'd be talking to people, but I'd be so zoned in on like one specific thing that I think I always had this sort of like background sense of I was missing some important context that I couldn't perceive properly because my attention was just like, so it's like all of this kind of surrounding stuff was like I wasn't getting it. And part of me knew I wasn't getting it. And that caused concern. Not like a lot, but
I think that's
the
hard. Paradox of losing the hindrances and then not having, like, being this single pointed and contracted and effortful becomes a hindrance in itself, right? And then you're kind of supposed to let go of it and let the meditation do itself.
The
Because I
thing
think
is,
I remember
yeah,
that, sorry, I remember that one of the, I don't know, it was also coming from a slight misunderstanding of the territory that I was kind of expecting to go through. And I thought that in order to advance further, I needed to get this one particular visual screen or like visual, visualization. And then at some point, I was so determined to get it. And I was putting in so much effort, I think I almost like passed out. I remember I just fell over. And then
wow.
I realized that, yeah, that effort in that sense is appropriate for the initial stages, but is totally inappropriate for everything that comes after. So everything that comes after should just be effortless, kind of flowing from one stage to another.
Mhm.
And it's actually the surrendering to, I think I would use that. I mean, it's maybe a loaded term, but surrendering to the practice gets you further.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I think one of the reasons when I did it this time I got further quicker is because of that. Um, I guess the thing I want to note though is, and this kind of shows how once you hit a certain level of a particular type of concentration, it starts impeding insight practice. So like I'd be focusing on the nimitta, but it's like I was effortlessly locked into exclusively the nimitta, or close to effortlessly. I had some very, very subtle contraction kind of happening around my headspace, but it wasn't, it's like very, very lightly valence to the point like it basically feels like nothing. And it actually takes quite a bit of effort to actually turn attention kind of to that and allow that to break up, um, and kind of de-solidify again. Um, and yeah, it's interesting because it's like effortless. What that means starts to be called into question, because you have this like generally very effortless focus on this one particular thing, but there's like a very, very slight hmm, it's like you have an inertia in a way also that you can't, it takes some effort to stop, but there is a state that's even better than that effortless concentration state that you can access if you can break out of that like inertia, that like groove that you're so locked into.
Yeah, I think this is also something that I'm trying to argue in the sessions,
hmm,
is that there are certain types of attention that just allow for better insight exploration than others.
mhm,
I think that people get a bit locked in on this clear vision and clear concentration, and I think I'm also, when I listen to you talk, maybe the state in itself has these properties of kind of like locking you into this groove,
yeah.
so that you really need to kind of pour over into a more open, even if it's more diffuse, attention.
Hmm. I think so. And it's interesting because I was talking to yeah, someone who's a monk who's done a lot of like super extreme concentration practices, and what he said is like he knows people that will go beyond that too, and they'll go to the point where like they literally, like that thing about turning attention on the solidification and breaking it up, like they can't even do that anymore. All they can do is like stop meditating for a while and it'll eventually clear up. So there's like some deeper lock-in apparently like under extreme concentration conditions is where that's even more the case, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can actually relate to that from my own experience, but that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I can't relate to it either. I don't know how long these people are meditating to get in that state, but it's sort of like you become powerless to not focus on whatever the object is. It's just pretty crazy. You become like a
Yeah.
vessel of singular focus. Hmm.
All right. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Maybe do we want to now like kind of pull this back? And I'd like to hear your understanding of the screens and what, because it's true that like right now I'd actually have to reflect on what I was actually experiencing in the retreat to even know what I currently understand there. But definitely what I understand is not what I understood before. But I kind of like, yeah, if you could talk about like what your understanding is now, and even like versus what you understood prior to that. Yeah, like I think that could be helpful. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's difficult to compare it against my prior understanding, but what I came to understand about the visual dimension and the screens is, so the first screen is just the nimitta. So it's just the after image, and whatever happens to the after image, whether it changes colors or whether it becomes a ring or a dot or whatever, this is all the first screen. So let's say that this whole thing is the visual screen, and usually my hand would be the first screen. And then let's say that the wall here is dark, because usually it's dark behind your eyes, then the wall would be the second screen. So when you first start meditating, when you just begin, whether a retreat or if you just do a home sit, you typically, at the beginning, you typically are working with the first and the second screen.
So just to paraphrase that,
so
it's
planes, or
yeah, you start with the nimitta and then
what's
as the
behind
focus, and then it becomes what's behind the nimitta, like sort of the background becomes the focus, and it's almost like the nimitta is what becomes the background.
Yeah. So the nimitta is the first screen and the background is the second screen. And so usually when you begin to meditate, nimitta will have color and the background will be completely dark, or it might have some snow, like specks of color or something like that. And eventually, with refreshing the nimitta, going through the sequence of the nimitta, maybe I should try to use a different, so going through the changes in the nimitta. When the nimitta disappears, you refresh again, it disappears, you refresh again, it disappears, you refresh again, and eventually the second screen, the background, will begin to gain more colors and it will start to do things. So what usually happens at first is that there appears some color washes or like color swarms, or like some, for me, what would happen is that there would be kind of like a wave, a sea wave washing onto the sand, this kind of effect of bluish or blue with like a green edge, where the foam would be on the wave, there would appear like a glittery green edge, and this would kind of wash over my visual field.
What is the nimitta, or some like hole where the nimitta was or something like that still present while this is happening?
Typically, no. Typically, I would say that the nimitta, so the first screen, is at that point completely gone, and all of this is happening on the second screen. And once the second screen starts doing stuff, then the second screen becomes the object. The nimitta is only there to stimulate the appearance of more intense visuals on the second screen.
Mhm.
And once the second screen starts doing what's expected, what it is expected to do, then basically you can, for me, I could stop refreshing, but there would still be some sort of cycle of images where, you know, when you get this kind of intuitive knowing that it's time to stop, or it's time
Yeah.
to refresh.
Hmm.
So that would rather be the motivation to refresh later on than really the complete darkness. I mean, sometimes the visuals would start to become less interesting, or yeah, so there would also be that motivation to refresh, but it's rather this kind of intuitive knowing that, okay, now this, whatever was happening is over, and I need to restart.
Yeah, I like how you, I just want to say I like how you said that, because that's one thing that I definitely noticed this time too. It's like the refresh process actually became completely automated. I would just watch myself, oh, I'm apparently refreshing the nimitta now.
Yeah.
And it wasn't clear. It's like on some subconscious level, attention knew that it wasn't, it's like some level of focus had failed, like some threshold had been crossed. So as a consequence, I just started activating the refresh protocol or program or something like that, which I found interesting, how when you do that enough, that becomes kind of, it's not cognitive. There are no thoughts actually involved with it. It just happens.
Yeah, I think I would maybe like to link back to that later. Also, this lack of cognition, I think that's also an important one to expand on. Yeah, but maybe now to continue
Third
about
screen.
the screens.
Or are we still on second?
Yeah, still second screen. So when yeah, I mean, when these color washes start appearing, then when the nimitta is there, yeah, I actually have to say I didn't do much work moving the nimitta around, but what I did do is that with the second screen, the initial exercises that I was doing is shape control and color control. So I would just intend, like gently just kind of set an intention and sit back for this very vague color. Sometimes it would be very vague, so just like specks of color on a black screen. I would just intend for that to shape into a square or to shape into a triangle. And after a few days in the retreat, that would start happening. Or I would just intend for that visual field to turn into a different color. And sometimes this would be very subtle. I think it's also important to look out for these subtle changes. Like, for example, when you close your eyes, you have these specks of colors, like tiny pixels. And sometimes the change would start to happen within the pixels. If you pay close attention, like each pixel will have its own color, and then like you set an intention for, I don't know, pink, or I don't know what colors are easier. I think rather maybe blues and purples and stuff like that, like darker colors are easier. But I mean, kind of easier to shift the whole visual field into. And I think that there is this normal rational doubt is my visual screen really changing colors, or am I only wishing it to change colors? So I'm just kind of seeing what I'm wishing to see. But that's exactly the point. Like, you are supposed to allow to see what you're wishing to see.
Yeah.
And then you just should stop asking the question, am I imagining this? Or because this is the whole point. Like, you are supposed to be seeing what you are imagining. And then
Those two things are brought together.
Yeah. And then your imagination just overlaps with what you perceive as reality. So initially it's like, is it really turning pink, or am I wishing it to turn pink? But then you start to see that these tiny specks of colors are really turning pink. And then this color dominance becomes stronger with repetition. And then you start to be able to do, and this is still all the second screen, and then you start to do color and shape control together. What was really easy for me to work with were numbers and letters, because we're so habituated to these shapes that it's really not difficult to bring them up in our conscious awareness. So I would just intend to see a number or a symbol, just a symbol in my visual screen, and slowly they would appear. And or I would just intend to see a letter, and slowly this letter would form. And I mean, they would sometimes even have a font, sometimes depending on like how far in the retreat, they would also start gaining more and more detail. So eventually they would appear in a particular font.
So
but
I just want to ask, before we go much further, is so you would say when you were working with the second screen, like it was a few days after having worked with the second screen, or the retreat itself? Like, I guess I'm wondering how long after you started with the second screen did you start getting intentional colors showing up?
So I have to say that during my last retreat, I spent actually almost the entire retreat. So not the entire, but almost the entire retreat in the second screen. And the second screen can get incredibly, or at least that was my experience, that the second screen can get incredibly rich. So it's, once it starts gaining depth and once it starts moving, it can reveal a lot of things. But so how do I structure this? So my second screen started, so I could do shape control and color control. Maybe I think I could do shape control 4 days in, very stably, like whenever I would intend for something to appear on my visual screen, that would appear. And initially those could not be very complex objects. Later I could literally imagine anything to appear on my visual screen, and it would show up. Initially those would be letters and simple geometric shapes, and maybe silhouettes of people or silhouettes of animals, rather silhouettes of things than defined shapes. That being said, also often in the evening, I would generally recommend to do this whole practice with dimmed lights. I was a bit unthoughtful in that regard, and I did large parts of my practice in bright light. But it is true that visuals get more intense with dark light, also because of the contrast and the dark background.
I actually, I just a comment on that. You had mentioned that before I did my retreat, and I sort of like, it renewed my commitment to doing it in darkness. So I actually had like one of those sleeping masks that I just kept putting over my eyes for pretty much the whole retreat. So that's another way. If you don't want to control the whole like ambient lighting, just mask yourself. If people see you, you look crazy, but
I mean, I also had a scarf, but I was really fond of going outdoors. So I actually spent large parts of the retreat outdoors. And there I could still use the bright screen, so contrasts would still form, but the experience would be different. The vividness, the depth of images would just be different. I would say that dark background is better for projection.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's good to keep in mind.
So yeah. Then what it seems that it often happens, what I've heard in other recordings, is that once the second screen starts moving, like whether it's color washes or maybe some initial shape control and stuff like that, it's very common to have these episodes of drifting. When you're kind of semi-dreaming, semi-sleeping, it's very lucid, it's very vivid. And as soon as you realize that you're in there, it just snaps out of it. I don't know if you've experienced those.
I guess I'd need to know more specifically what you mean by that, but I guess you're asking me if I've experienced them because you, I guess, didn't so much, right? So
no, I did a lot.
Oh, you did. Okay. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean then?
Yeah, I think that we already spoke about it a while ago, and I think that you knew what I was talking about. So you're sitting and you start almost as if dreaming, but it feels more real than reality sometimes. And you're experiencing this scenario and you're still meditating, you're still sitting, but there is like a vivid scenario going on in your head. It's like a dream. And as soon as you realize that you are not concentrated or that you're like not meditating, you just snap out of it. And if you try to gain any control over it, it's impossible. Like as soon as you gain actual awareness, you just snap out of it.
Would you, or how would you compare that to like sort of hypnagogic imagery? I'm curious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like that.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah.
And you're saying it's like episodic?
Yeah, I think this is particular to the first few days of the retreat.
First few days.
Or it's typical for this stage when the second screen starts gaining details. Then you also go through a hypnagogic state phase, and then this phase later almost completely disappears. What was interesting is that I had kind of a reset at the towards the end of my retreat, and I had a feeling like my whole progression was starting from zero, and I went again through this hypnagogic phase. This is how I was kind of almost certain that the whole progression had reset because I was going through that phase again.
Yeah, now I'm wondering if I wasn't mapping it onto my own experience correctly before. Maybe I want to hear you talk about the whole smorgasbord of your experience, and then I'll come back to this.
What's smorgasbord?
Like the whole enchilada, the whole thing. Your whole experience before coming back to it.
All right, it's the first time I encountered the term.
We'll insert one into the video of this, just like
define.
Exactly. We'll insert a hypnagogic smorgasbord.
Yeah, I think what is also common for these initial stages is that you would get flashes of very vivid images. Like you would get flashes of images that are completely clear pictures of how you normally perceive the world.
Are they animated?
very often for me, and I think what I also read from other people is that there would be just kind of still very brief appearances of very clear images.
Okay. Yeah, that's again
Did you
sounds like the
experience those?
hypnagogic stuff.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
I'm not sure I did. And so one of the things that I'm trying to distinguish is when I did have like hyper realistic imagery, if that's the same type of thing you're talking about. But I don't, right now I'm inclined to think that it wasn't.
No, this would not be kind of permanently lasting or moving. It's just kind of very brief flashes of very vivid imagery that would just come and disappear, and then again just come and disappear. I wouldn't be able to reconstruct the triggers now because it's been some time. Maybe we can talk again after my next retreat.
Yep.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Another
Yeah,
thing
that's
that's
interesting.
typical for initial stages is that, and this is a tricky one, and I've listened about it also in other people's reports, is that you can get kind of previews of the more advanced stages or like of the later stages in retreat on day 1, day 2, maybe up to day 3, and this may give you kind of a preview or like maybe even an illusion that you've gone really far really quickly, and then they would just disappear. And this is kind of a trick that you can, or like a trap that you can fall into, is that you will try to re-establish or like reinstantiate these experiences, but you need to go through the whole territory to get to them. So this is kind of a tricky one. I remember I had a really strong no self experience. I think probably the strongest no self experience that I ever had on the first night of my retreat. So I arrived in the afternoon and I started meditating around 5. And in the evening, just a few hours in, I had the strongest no self experience ever, and it was permanent, and it was just like fully no self, no agency, nothing. That was one thing. And then
What do you mean by
also
permanent?
had
Just to clarify.
permanent in the sense that it wouldn't end with the sit. It was lasting through
going.
my evening, like I don't know, toothbrushing routine, going to bed, and I mean there was like a background that like some circumstances that led me to kind of forcing myself back into a self state. And it was really hard to do. Like it was really hard to bring up the memory of having a self and having a feeling of agency in your limbs, in every movement. It took me like a whole night while I was sleeping, but then I also woke up pretty early with it. And it took me hours to bring myself back into I don't know, just like a normal agency, feeling of agency, you know?
I think actually I know pretty well. Yeah, I think I've had something similar to that. Yeah, okay, cool. That explains it, I think. Yeah, it's weird when those things happen because you start wondering like how long is this gonna be like this? And then there's
I don't know, now it's hard to say. I also feel like if I hadn't forced it back into a different state or like a previous state, I think it could have just stayed permanent. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say, but what was interesting is that this just happened on, I mean, now my state is totally different from how it was before the retreat, but these were like later developments in the retreat. But what was really interesting is that this happened after maybe 3 hours of meditation.
Yeah.
and I was not particularly concentrated before the retreat. Like I didn't practice almost at all because I was traveling on days prior to that. So I just sat, did 3 hours of candle meditation, and that was it. Another thing that happened on the first night was an experience of traveling, or I mean, it wasn't an out of the body experience. It was travel that was very vivid, and I had a lot of control, and I wasn't able to get that much control, and yeah, and that much detail and kind of action and characters and everything at other points in the retreat. Like my most vivid traveling experience happened on the first evening of the retreat.
Yeah,
and this is not uncommon, it seems.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Just to kind of go back to the general thing we're talking about, is like the sort of like non-linear nature of these things. It can, yeah, I definitely relate to, like, you get these like sequences of things happening early and you think, oh, I've got here, awesome. And then you think you're there, but it's like you're only there for that moment, and the next, and you think you're going to sit down again and you're going to go back there, and you're not. And it might take like another day and a half before you have something similar happen again. And whether it's, whether they're, I guess I'm not sure whether I consider them previews or just like something about the cyclical nature of how things work. They, like, those things come and go, but it is like mentally knowing that that's going to happen, I think, is actually one of those things that's quite helpful to avoid getting frustrated, because you have to be able to let go when that's, because it's like super cool. You're like, oh, this was just awesome. I just had this. I'm like gonna have more of this, and it's like, no, you're not. It's
like, or you might, but it's gonna come later.
Yeah, it's like patience, my friend.
Yeah. I think that I'm just guessing that it might be also because you're just suddenly changing the basic pattern of your brain. Like you're just suddenly changing your main way of functioning. And it could be that this is the reaction, that like you get these effects that would normally come after longer practice very suddenly, just because of this sudden switch. So yeah, maybe there are, I don't know, maybe there are some shifts in like the internal functioning of the brain that just kind of shows up as a reaction to just all of a sudden sitting for 5 hours in a row, you know.
I
don't know, it's a very superficial way of explaining it, I realize, but I don't have a better
no, it's, I mean, this is all sort of speculative. It just occurred to me another like speculative idea. Oh wait, maybe it left. No, it's gone for now. Maybe it'll come back. Oh, okay, I remember what it was. It may be that like okay, so here's this thing. It's like the degree of concentration and how fast that dissipates. It's possible that that's more complex than we might initially think. So one of the things I would notice is if I did like 4 hours in a row, towards the end of that 4 hours, I was in a, not always, but more often than not, in a fairly impressive place. And then even like take an hour break to eat and like walk around, come back, and you lose a lot at the beginning of the retreat. And it's probably true that you always lose a lot, but later on you have this sort of like slower build, more durable kind of concentration that doesn't fade that quickly, I think. So it's like you lose your place. It's like you slide backwards super quick early on, whereas later you kind of like, yeah, like built yourself up, into the mountain better or something.
Yeah, this is what I think. Mike, who organized the previous retreats that I attended,
Yeah.
he called this really. He used the word momentum, like that you're building
Nice.
momentum.
And
I think this is a perfect description of how it works. Yeah, initially you need to really put in a lot of effort and try to have as little breaks or like disturbances in general as possible. And later it can be a bit spoiled. Like later on, after, I don't know, a week of hard work and hard investment into gaining momentum, then you can kind of relax, or your attention doesn't dissipate as much. But I definitely noticed, if I would take, like, there were days when I would take even a 3-hour break with like a phone call or something like that in between, and my attention would just my concentration would not fully dissipate, but I would really need to put in a lot of work to reestablish it again. And then it kind of, it falls down, but it never quite drops fully. And then each time you rebuild it, you build it slightly higher, and then it drops, and then each time you build it, it gets slightly higher. And I think a good milestone to hit is to wake up concentrated. Like for me, this is an important milestone. Like if I wake up feeling like I'm already concentrated, then I know that I'm definitely on a good path to building a very strong, very stable concentration.
Yeah, I like that as a kind of litmus test. Maybe it'd be good. We can even can always cut out this now, but it'd be good to get maybe like a visual. If we can draw some sort of visual of how we perceive this to work, it could be helpful, because I think people don't really think about this stuff, but it's quite relevant. And as far as like managing expectations, it's also, I think, quite important. It's one thing I was definitely, I mean, we've already talked about this, but I was definitely reminded of is like Fire Kasina is a practice where you need like preferably 10 plus hours a day. Like it's not the type of practice where you really get that much out of it. Even if you're doing like 6 hours a day, it'll take you super long to build up. And you might never build up to the more kind of psychedelic, like the more kind of extreme psychedelic aspects of it doing that. It's like there are lots of other retreat styles and other techniques where you don't need that degree of concentration or meditating each day, but Fire Kasina is like, you have to give it what, like kind of everything or close to everything that you have. And that's when it kind of shows you its fruits most.
Yeah, definitely. But I would also say that it's totally worth it. Because also, if you don't build up to the very far end of what Fire Kasina is typically expected to get, the kind of concentration that you build with it is a really good foundation for insight practices.
Yeah.
And I think that this combination of this hardcore concentration strength and doing insight is still a valuable kind of combination or thing to work for in itself.
True. I think Fire Kasina is a great, if you're doing a retreat and you're roughly dividing it into like a concentration period at the beginning and then an insight period. I mean, you're doing some insight with Fire Kasina as well, but if you want to use it as like concentration prep for then doing insight, it's awesome for that.
Yeah, but I would also recommend, now if we are giving kind of advice, I would also just warn people that it can be a tricky way to prepare, because it can also result in very vivid dreaming. If you are normally prone to having visions or anything like that, Fire Kasina is amping that
Right.
property of cognition.
Yeah.
I recently had a friend who was doing Fire Kasina a few hours, maybe not more than 2 hours a day for a few days. And he started having, like, also in just like normal daily, normal parts of the day, he would have, kind of feeling that there is a visual impression in his mind, or like closing the eyes, he would start to get visual. So if people are not comfortable with this, then I would recommend choosing a different concentration practice. But if people are comfortable with having visuals, having very vivid dreams, things like that, then yeah, I think Fire Kasina is an excellent concentration practice.
Yeah, no, I like that as a caution. And it is also true that it's a bit edgier than other types of things. So if you want, I mean, I would say if you want to like optimize the sort of like pleasantness or like positive valence of your experience, it might not be the one to choose either. Like you might want to do something more like jhana practice or something, which I think my experience is it feels better, but it's a very it leaves you in a somewhat different place concentration wise than Fire Kasina does. But
yeah, I also have a tip for that. Something that I discovered spontaneously is doing metta on the flame.
Oh, that's cool. I want to try that now.
Yeah, this really changed the whole atmosphere for me. And I don't know, I started having this friendly, cozy feeling with a candle and with a nimitta, and I just got this cozy feeling in the whole Fire Kasina space. Just so I was doing metta every evening. And at some point I realized, oh, I should also show some gratitude to the candle, like to my only partner here. And then I did that, and that really did change the atmosphere. I really started experiencing more pleasant, atmosphere in my entire surroundings. That was really nice.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd like to give that a go. It actually reminds me one other thing I did that I'm not sure of even how advisable this is, but for me, it also helped like remotivate me in mid-retreat is I would do Fire Kasina while listening to music. And what I found is that because music generally is good for changing your mood or your state. And also once you get quite concentrated, you can also sort of like be absorbed by the music you're listening to as you're listening to it. And so if you can really put yourself in some really nice places, actually kind of guide your way into them. You're not going to focus on the nimitta as well as you would if you weren't listening to music. So it's not something you want to do all the time, but like every once in a while, if you do that, it can be it can be quite wonderful actually.
Yeah, what I was doing a lot are these binaural beats, or like these frequency recordings.
I did them almost all retreat. Awesome.
Yeah, this was so helpful, because sometimes you would really get tired from just refreshing and doing it all over again. And then I realized that I could like put in a few hours extra on every day. If I just lay back, I would just lay back, play this type of music in my headphones, and I would just let the screen kind of synchronize with whatever was on the like whatever was in the music. And I would usually find these, I mean, I would kind of play a few to find the one that sounds appealing at that moment, and I would go through these, on YouTube they have a lot of these, like, I don't know, 536 frequency hertz frequency, attract abundance and unlimited health in your life, or just these kind of, I don't know, manifestation support videos. I don't know what they would
be. No, I've totally gone there.
Yeah, and they turned out to be immensely helpful for this type of practice. So I would usually do them after lunch, if I want to recline, I would put these on and just close my eyes and just let the visual synchronize. And I would also do some type of meditation with my eyes open, and I would just kind of, with a very light focus or like unfocused, I would look at the trees and just let the motion in the trees synchronize with the sounds. Or in the evening after metta and after I get ready for bed, I would just lie down and I would do the same. I would just close my eyes and let the visuals synchronize with the music. And that was really pleasant. And actually you're still practicing, like you're still, maybe you're not, I don't know. I would be curious if I could, I don't know, if you could establish a measure of how hard you're practicing or like how hard you're concentrating, but still, I mean, I would be focused on the visuals, and the sound would also shut down other incoming signals. So my thoughts would dissipate. The external sounds would no longer play a role, because this type of music is very immersive. So it's almost as if your entire being is just synchronized with these waves, right?
Yeah, I the decreasing the sort of like thinking activity part definitely resonates with me. I did find that it would do that too. Like I would mind wander less, because it's almost like the music would help me stay. It would help me not necessarily stay with the nimitta for longer stretches of time, but return to it more frequently, almost like a guided meditation does, where they remind you, if you become distracted, to turn your attention back to the meditation object. It's like the music would occasionally just act as like a cue to return my attention, which I found interesting. Yeah, music with vocals works worse, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
On that line as well. I haven't tried it with the binaural beats that have like the music overlaid. I was doing like the pure just tone back and forth thing, but now I want to try the
I
other
had
one.
these like pleasant kind of wavy sounds, or something like, or like
I've used those before to study.
yeah, exactly. Or these ones that have Tibetan flute or nature sounds, or something like that. That's also very non-invasive. It's not like, in that sense, like verbal music, but it's still pleasant. So yeah, I didn't do just like the pure frequency vibration.
Yeah, it's just for the record, 40 hertz gamma is the most scientifically studied to help people focus. Yeah, super interesting. I want to return to the screens again, because I feel like we still didn't get. Have we got out of the second screen yet, or are we still in the second screen? I'm not sure.
No, but I also think, like, if we go back and put chapters, then the previous chapter can be like the beginning of the second screen, and we can then go back to talking about the later stages of the second screen.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Or what do you think? Maybe now that we were talking about these kind of combinations of practices and stuff like that, maybe it would also be a good idea to talk about how to maintain concentration while eating, while cooking, while doing these like menial tasks.
Yeah, it's a good thing to talk about. I don't consider myself particularly good at it, but I've tried and done it to some extent. So yeah, what about you? How did you try and keep the flame of Fire Kasina alive in between sits?
And this is also where I got some advice from Daniel that was helpful, and I carried some experiences over from other retreats. So one thing I would do while cooking or I had to cook for myself and I had to do like a bit of cleaning and stuff like that. So during these tasks, I would try to note through the experience. So I would just try to be mindful, maintain basic mindfulness, and just like, I don't know, do as much noting as I can. Of course, sometimes when you're cutting something, you need to be more focused on the task, but at other times you can just be more focused on the metacognition of the experience.
What type of noting would you do? What type of noting would you do?
I would either do just noticing, or I wasn't really particular about the types of labels, so I wasn't doing like I don't know, 5 cents doors, 6 cents doors, or anything like that. I would just do kind of free labels, whatever label comes into mind. I don't know, hand, feeling, whatever. I would just
Pasty.
Either put any label just kind of as a marker of, okay, noticed or known, or I would just do noticing. So just like duck, 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 whatever, just this mental check. Or I would do, I think see, hear, feel for me really does the job for these, like, I don't know, periods where it's not important what I'm focused on, or I'm not exploring any particular sense or any particular experience, or I'm not really exploring anything. I just need to maintain awareness. I should just prevent my mind from drifting endlessly and mindlessly, and just like prevent the mind from doing mind stuff, but just like maintain the basic level of mindfulness.
So like, for example, when would you do that? Just to give an example of an activity when.
If I'm brushing my teeth, preparing food, for anything that would involve walking outside of the house, I would do walking meditation. And then I would focus on the sensations in the feet, like really, I would walk usually very slowly, and I would focus on the sensations in the feet, or as slowly as the activity allows me to. And I would focus on the sensations in the feet, and I would also focus on the surface of the ground, whether it's tiles or grass or something like that. I would just like have this, like something like when you're doing an earth Kasina, just like this type of almost unwavering vision at nothing in particular, but like kind of just following like keeping a perspective on the surface as you're moving through. So you're not like particularly focused on any place, but you're just like scanning as you're moving. This is how I would describe it mostly.
Sounds a little bit like how we notice sort of like maybe parallax or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is actually another kind of thing that can be done there when walking outside. Just noticing how the different objects move at different speeds in relation to each other as you're moving.
So if I would be in the forest, because I had these two environments, like an open field, the house, another one would be the house, but outside like an open field and the forest. And in the forest, it would definitely be more the parallax, or just like choosing an area on the road, and then I would just like follow that. Or if I'm in the open, then I would just observe the grass.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's kind of helpful to like throw those kinds of strategies out.
And another one this was like a formal instruction that I received, and it was quite helpful, is to get the nimitta. So generate the nimitta and then place it at an object. So if you were indoors, then you would look at the candle, get the image, and then you would place the nimitta at the wall.
Yep.
And then stare into it, walk towards it, turn the other way, place it against the other wall or another object. I mean, usually you need to have a uniform background if you wanted to be, noticeable initially. But yeah, and then you just do the walking like that. So you're just projecting the nimitta on a surface, looking at it, walking towards it, and then projecting in another place. And I would do this indoors, and I would also do it outdoors. I would get the nimitta. This is I did something really stupid. I was staring at the sun and I damaged my eye. So I was getting the nimitta from the sun, but I was staring a bit too long for, so I would definitely advise people against staring at the sun for a long time. You can read up about how much sun exposure eyes can take. Usually a few seconds are okay and not directly in the sun.
Yeah.
It is convenient to use the sun outdoors to get the nimitta, but it's also a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally.
So
I'm
maybe,
afraid of the sun.
So maybe the LED from your phone or something like that, or like a flashlight or something like that would be a better thing to get the nimitta from. And then you place the nimitta on a tree and you walk towards it. And then when that tree becomes too close or something, then you place it to another tree and you walk towards it. And then you do this. What will start to happen there eventually is that the nimitta will start to kind of fuse with the bark and start like changing colors with the tree.
That's awesome.
And if a tree has, I don't know, like this vertical zebra stripes bark with like an oak tree with very strong relief.
Yeah.
Then you would really start to see that color of the nimitta is kind of seeping through these grooves in the bark, and that's a good sign.
Wow. Yeah, that's super cool. Now it makes me want to
contrast. You would start to see contrast with the bark, and then also with the whole forest with the tree. Like with the trees, you would start to see, just like when doing Earth Kasina, you would start to see like more prominent contrast with the background. Also, the grass would sometimes start to flash a little bit. And then what happens is that eventually you can place the nimitta at the trees or behind the trees. You could start to like play with the planes. So you could start to place the nimitta in front of one tree and behind another tree, kind of in between the trees, or like all the way in the back or something like that. That's a cool effect to achieve, and that also means progress. And then what you can do, what we spoke about all the way before, about how you initially start the manipulations of the second screen, then you can start to project images with your eyes open. So just like how previously you would intend for a square to appear on the screen, you can start to intend for this cloud that is nimitta that you are like placing around the space. You can start to intend for it to change shapes.
Yeah, that's super cool. Just to clarify what you mean by, so like you're saying with changing the depth of the nimitta, like if you're looking at a tree that's in front of you and there's another tree directly behind that tree or something, you can place the nimitta so like in your depth of field it's behind that first tree. So unless you were to go past that first tree, you can't actually perceive it, even though you're projecting it there. Is that what you're saying? Like you're projecting it in depth, so it is covered up?
Yeah, it's not always covered up, but I mean, you're placing like a cloud between, So
awesome.
part of it is covered up by the first tree, but the nimitta is covering a part of this tree behind it. Or like if there are more trees, then you can just place it in a very realistic way, as if it was like a sheet of paper or something, or a little cloud hovering in
That's
between
awesome.
these trees. And then eventually I would intend for a bird to appear, and this nimitta would take on a silhouette of a bird, and eventually the bird would start like flying in between the trees, or like a butterfly would fly. It's a silhouette, it's not like a realistically looking butterfly,
Yeah.
but it would be doing what you expect a butterfly to do. It flies through the trees as a purplish silhouette.
This is what shows you the brain knows exactly what butterflies do.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't actually need to see them to simulate that well.
Yeah.
Wow.
And another thing that you can do even without the nimitta is, so when you are looking, if you're looking, I don't know, at this grass patch, or I think this is where it's where it's easiest to notice, or if you're looking at a forest in the distance, you get this kind of grainy background, or like any kind of grainy background. Like if you find anything that looks like sandpaper, or anything that looks like TV snow.
Yep.
This type of background can easily change shapes. So your brain will very easily start to synthesize shapes that you want to see. It's like this butterfly thing with a
because
background
it looks like noise.
Yeah, so anything that looks like noise. If you look through the forest, you don't focus so much on the trunks, but you focus on all the leaves. So you take this type of object and you start to play with it. And then there you can also do the second screen effects. So the second screen shape and even color manipulations a bit. I think for me, colors were a bit more difficult with eyes open. I could change shades slightly, but not really like get a full-blown color. But I would get shape control with this noisy background. So I could project, I don't know, a square, like, I don't know, a circle with a square around it, with a triangle around it, or, you know, just like I could play with shapes like that.
Quite interesting.
Just with eyes open, if I find a good background for it.
How long after you were getting shapes and colors with your eyes closed were you able to do this outside?
So I would say the initial shape and color control with eyes closed began manifesting stably after maybe day 4. And so when I say stably, like every time I would intend to see something like a simple shape with eyes closed and change it into any color with eyes closed, I could do it.
Yep.
And then maybe after, I mean, I have a journal that where I could just check when these things were appearing, but maybe after day 7 or 8, could I do this with eyes open, with stability, and then I could just do this whenever I want throughout the whole retreat. But
how long was your retreat? Just to
17 days.
17 days, yeah. It's a good length of time.
Yeah, and what I couldn't do, I couldn't get like, besides these butterflies and birds and like simple things like that are kind of like rather a GIF motion rather than like a real video, you know, like this kind of distinction of a few frames just spinning around rather than a thing that has agency, that can like do things. And so I with eyes open, I could get these simple images, but I could never get really elaborate images. Or I could, but I would have to like really get all the conditions right, but I wouldn't. It's a bit hard to say what the conditions are, you know, like the more you get concentrated, the easier it is. But yeah, I think that's something where I still need to practice. And so all of this, what I've described, would be all second screen phenomena.
Okay, cool. Yeah, nice how we've
Yeah.
brought this all back there again.
Yeah. And also, like in terms of eyes closed, how the second screen progresses is that these simple images, they gain complexity and they gain depth. So eventually they become 3D and they gain details and they become more realistically looking, but still do not necessarily gain like fully realistic colors. So it's not like you see a person and you can see that person very clearly, but it's still kind of almost as an artistic impression of that person, or like an image with effects. It's not like the photo of that person, but it's some colors are reduced or some vibrancy is reduced.
It's funny because I never actually used Fire itself, and I don't have like that much of a connection there. I've never felt any hotter at all from doing Fire Kasina, despite reports of that.
Yeah, I did actually experience temperature increases. Yeah, definitely.
I experienced
But
temperature fluctuations,
of,
but I think that's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, there are many things that you are now like making me remember that I just totally forgot.
That's why it's cool to be doing this as a conversation.
Yeah. I think there is also like a golden period for doing this kind of interview. Like I feel that I'm now too far from the previous retreat to remember things with detail. But if I had done it, depending on the topic though, but if I had done certain topics immediately after the retreat, I think they would have been a bit, or like what I would say would sound a bit insane, I think. So I think that there's like a safe distance of not too close to the retreat, but not too far either.
I mean, maybe you do the insane recording for private consumption, and then you can like watch that again like some little bit of time later to keep those memories more alive, but also have like the benefit of sort of time and perspective.
Yeah, definitely, exactly.
Yeah. Let's see, one thing I thought I'd add, now it's like coming quite long after this part of the discussion happened, but I just thought I'd add is a couple other things I found that I could do to maintain concentration in between sits. So one was I would just be doing like slightly forced breathing as I walked around everywhere. And that works pretty well. And the other was if I'm walking around at night under streetlights, and it's funny because like the context of my retreat was in the city, so it had a number of challenges, but one of the advantages is you can use street lamps to reestablish the nimitta. So I'd be like walking home from, I'd be walking home from this Buddhist center to my house, and I would just like look up to a street light, and then I could project the nimitta onto some patch of darkness on the horizon. And I would just occasionally refresh from some other like street, like public light source as I'd walk home. In fact, I did it while biking actually as well. Sorry.
What?
I did it while biking.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it made the retreat very weird. Even biking on like bonkers high concentration is a weird experience.
Yeah, I did a bunch of different stuff. So I was clearing out these forest paths by removing grass and stuff like that. And this I also managed to do in a pretty concentrated way. I was also clearing out some bushes, cutting down some trees, stuff like that. Like I also managed to do a bunch of activities. But I also noticed this could be particular to me. Like I really like hard physical activities. So I would kind of tire myself out by doing something difficult. And then I would use this energy that's generated from the activity to just sit, like in this buzz of almost like, oh, I cannot move anymore. But also there is a lot of energy that you've generated in the muscles, and then just like sit in this buzz until it wears out, and then I would go for another like bout of something, whether it's I don't know, an exercise or whatever. And this was also really helpful. I actually really enjoyed those. And to maybe now we're kind of bringing in the stages of insight a bit abruptly, but this is what really helped me get through the worst reobservation period throughout the retreat. So I was clearing out some bushes. So I would just like do maybe like 20 minutes of cutting, and I would get all tired, but this would also prevent me from going in this like agitated state of like getting frustrated and I don't know, like trying to get somewhere without getting anywhere and doubting everything that I'm doing and whatever. So I would do hard work. And then when I feel that I've tired my faculties out, then I would just sit and meditate. And then when I feel that I'm starting to proliferate again, then I would get to work. And then I would, when I feel tired enough, I would sit and meditate again. This did wonders for me. I don't know if there could be like a replacement pattern for if, I don't know, if bushes are not available or something like that. But this combination of hard exercise or like hard work and sitting was really good for me during critical points in the retreat.
Yeah, it's interesting because unlike some more general life level, what I used to do before I started meditating to sort of change my state of mind is I would do like super vigorous exercise, and I'd be in some sort of horrible state, and then just run myself into the ground, and that would just turn off my brain. And then like as I started meditating, I'm like, I don't really need to do this. I have other things I can do. But it's like under kind of more exaggerated states on retreat, it's like that actually becomes of utility or useful in like the same way it was initially prior to meditating. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's keep going with the screens.
All right, so, but do you like what I'm describing about the second screen? Is that something that you can relate to, or does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so there's definitely like the point in what I now can call the second screen, in which you start to get the emergence of three-dimensionality and increased like shading detail, to put it in one way. And then but then there's something that's quite distinct. You might even get like slight, you can get like some kinds of movement there, but you can't seemingly get others. Like there's like a type of rotation I found that would happen with objects that wouldn't happen at that stage. It would happen at some later stage where you get like the full like object rotation, like as if it were like, you know, like a 3D rotation thing. And that didn't happen yet. It's like somehow it's like the three-dimensionality is still not fully emerged or something. That was my observation. I don't know how that maps on to what your experience was.
Yeah, when movement happened on the second screen, I think this is something that I already tried explaining in the previous video with Daniel, but so with these images, how they would get progressively more complex, or whether they would start to move or something. Initially, it would be a bit choppy, or the range of motion would be reduced. So it would be kind of like short and cyclical or something like that. And then eventually they would become more fluid with more frames in between.
Yeah.
And gain more detail, more realistic. How do you say? They would become more realism. And there was like a point in which sequences of images started to appear like videos. And initially they were very choppy. They reminded me of this video. What is this? It's like an 80s video. Aha, I think is the band, or it's a very popular song that I always avoid because I don't like it.
I don't know it yet, but now I'm afraid to listen to it.
Yeah, it's like a pencil sketch video where there are these images that are moving, but they're very choppy because there are some frames missing. So yeah, initially they would appear like that, and then they would start to flow more smoothly. And sometimes I could kind of wish for a certain image to appear, and then that image would start doing something. Sometimes I could control what the images are doing, but other times a seemingly random image would appear. Sometimes I could interpret what this image means symbolically or literally, sometimes not. But so like an image would just arise on its own and would start moving. So for example, there was this one moment where there was like a man walking through one door and then another door and then another door, and then just kind of like opening these doors. And then eventually, I cannot remember so clearly now, but I know that eventually there was something behind a door. So it wasn't just like a random sequence of door, but it was kind of like in this scenario and the setting that appeared, it was actually kind of getting to something.
Right.
And I wasn't really controlling this image or anything. It was just doing itself. And there was another instance where I was just looking at this snow of colors in front of my eyes, and I would, as soon as I would notice a shape in it, this shape would take over. So I would be looking at the snow, like at the colors, and then I once identified like a shape of a tiger. And this was like a very vague shape of like a silhouette of a tiger. But as soon as I identified something that I could recognize, this head, like the silhouette of a head, started moving to reveal the whole tiger, and like with the stripes and everything. And then the tiger started running, and then slowly ground underneath, like a shape of a ground appeared, and a shape of some kind of grassy natural background appeared. And slowly, as the tiger was running, it started like getting more like realistic tiger colors and shapes of like, I don't know, what is it, black and orange and like whites and stuff like that. And the detail on this particular scene were getting more and more clear and more realistic, until at the end it was actually a really nice visual of this tiger running through, I don't know, some natural landscape. But I could intend for adding trees or like adding hills or adding stuff like that. But at that point, I couldn't make this tiger do much more than just run. But I could add details to this scene. And I could do that also with other scenes. This is one example.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to go to a couple points here. One is, I think you kind of highlighted when you talked about how it started this interesting aspects of how Fire Kasina works, that like as soon as the mind as soon as it appears the thought it's a tiger, like what you're actually seeing seemingly at the moment when you see that thought it's a tiger happens isn't necessarily even something that really like looks like a tiger. It can be super vague. It can be like there's something that's only like very vaguely reminiscent, sort of like looking at a cloud that, very, very vaguely looks like a duck. But as soon as you have that thought, it like sets off the becoming of the tiger. It's like the recognition then ends up manifesting the image, which is quite interesting. And I want to think about it more even academically, because it says something quite interesting about how perception can work. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of point that out. I guess I'd also like to know a little bit more of like the quality of the visual when you're describing this scene. Like, what was the, I don't know how to say it, like like, what's the art style, or what's the, how much is happening with depth, or, yeah, things kind of like that, I guess, to like situate what happened here, possibly in relation to other things. Did you have maybe any panic, like was there panning, for example? Because it like sometimes there can be like a lot of kind of view panning, and other times there isn't. So yeah, just all this type of stuff.
Yeah, there definitely was panning. I mean, it would appear later.
Okay.
Yeah, on the second screen, so there would appear three-dimensionality, but I would say that it would still be a limited three-dimensionality, as if you're like holding a box, and within that box there are some shapes where one is standing in front of the other, and they have shape and structure, but still I wouldn't get the very far and very deep three-dimensionality that I have when I'm looking outside, for example, if that can be a comparison.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
In terms of colors, eventually there would be realistic color attribution. Like, for example, in the case of this tiger, the appropriate colors would be where they are expected to be, but the amount of detail would not be realistic. So it's not like even when you see a tiger on TV, you can, even if it's far, maybe I'm not really sure how eyes work, but you can still see that it has hairs. Like you can really see the shine in the eye and like little details like that, which tells you this is a realistic image of a tiger. Here, it would never be so realistic. It's like a watercolor representation rather than a fully realistic photograph or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good description. That's kind of like what I wanted to bring out. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And then I would say that the point for me where this was starting to shift into what is called the third screen. So the third screen is supposed to reveal, from what I understand, although I didn't get a very strong third screen, or I didn't get very strong third screen effects. Third screen should be photorealistic. So in terms of no matter how much you zoom in, it still preserves all of its qualities and clarity, and yeah. And it's three-dimensional, and I think that the third screen should reveal like fully realistic imagery in front of your eyes. Like you close your eyes and you can visualize, I don't know, this room or whatever as realistic as you're seeing it with your eyes open. This is what I understand, and these are the effects that I started getting towards the end. But how they start emerging is, and this was really difficult for me to understand. I think partially because of my understanding of the words that are used to describe this terminology don't quite match the understanding of the words of the people who were coming up with this terminology. So they are using something like, let me try to find it. I'm going through the glossary now. Yeah,
Glossary
molten
where,
gold.
just for whoever's
I'm looking at the
watching this?
glossary at the Fire Kasina website. So there is something
Okay,
that
cool.
they call, I think this is white gold or molten gold. No, this is not it. See, I'm really like I think I need to gain more experience with the territory to be able to know what is actually meant by all of these.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that list yet. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're gonna need to cut this out because I'm not really getting anywhere with this.
Or more
But
entertainingly, speed it up.
Yeah. But what I was trying to say, so how where to look for the transition towards the second screen, towards the third screen. So I remember that there was a point around day 5, or I think, or maybe day 6 or something, where I would be looking at this second screen. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not really sure about days, but let's say maybe day 6-ish.
Okay.
When I would be looking at my second screen image that's at this point has some depth and has some like color shades, but definitely doesn't look realistic and definitely doesn't actually look 3D. You can just kind of infer what's in front and what's behind, but it doesn't look 3D. And then all of a sudden, this image just kind of bubbled up into, you know, when you use this chrome effect on images or on like this word art, when you get this chrome effect, and then all of a sudden it has like these oily or like metal shine in the shape. It's like kind of making an imprint in an aluminium lid, or like making an imprint. So something like that. Exactly. It's like as if this image that I had on the second screen just became like a 3D imprint of itself.
Nice.
And this just kind of really bubbled up, like it just kind of separated itself without a sound.
Unfortunately.
From this flat image, it just bubbled up into this imprint image. And I think that this is what they call plastic. And it's true that when this effect occurs, it correlates with a heightened ability to do color and shape control. And around that point is when my second screen started moving smoothly and doing a lot more, and I could kind of interact with the second screen and I don't know, almost ask questions that get answers, you know, just kind of really had this feeling of interaction between my intentions and my thought space and the second screen.
Yeah.
This is where it got really noticeably more responsive. And another effect which happened, I think on the same day even, is I remember I was meditating while slightly reclining, and I had a feeling that I was lying at the bottom of like a shallow water or something, like a stream. And I was looking through the water at some bushes or something, like some vegetation above the water. And I didn't have fully realistic colors, or it was as if it was during dusk, or like during a time when the light did not allow for all the colors to appear fully.
Yeah.
But the surface of the water was perfectly clear and like really following the natural motion of the water, and whatever was above the water was as crisp as in real life, in reality. It's just that the
Yeah.
colors at this point were not yet fully realistic, but every other aspect of this image and the depth of the image was fully realistic.
So it was animated, right? You're saying?
Yeah, it was animated. It was still it was the same principle like what I said before with like this GIF type
Yeah.
movement. It wasn't, not much was happening, but it was perfectly smooth, perfectly clear. The motion was very realistic. Yeah, everything except colors was perfectly realistic. And if you consider that, oh, it might not be like full sunshine, it might be somewhere in the shade, then you could also kind of buy into the colors being real, but they actually were not.
Yeah. It's interesting because that also resonates with a bunch of kind of similar things I've had. For me, it's interesting because it seems like that type of stuff initially, and I only kind of have the initially as an example, but that type of stuff initially seems to happen with like objects that have certain textures or patterns and not others. So like I would get it not with bushes, but with like, for example, pebbles. I had pebbles below clear water. So I was like looking down on the water and all these like pebbles under the water. And that it's sort of like, yeah, what you say. If the lighting conditions were right, that would have been perfectly realistic. But it's like a very particular lighting conditions, which kind of leads you to believe, yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
but I think this is a key point. And I think that this is something that that is a regular milestone as well, this effect of the surface of the water.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because I had that later also when what I said about the reset of the whole thing. The water started appearing later, and then but later I knew what it meant. So initially I didn't know what it means, that I should actually allow the water to appear every time. So this watery effect actually brings up the third screen. These are like this plastic, this like imprint bubbling up, the watery effect, and there is another shape that appears, is the sign of the third screen. What the third thing is, for me, it manifested as an overlay on the whole visual screen of something that looks like the surface of the fingerprint. And it has this iridescence, kind of like oily iridescence. So it's like as if the light would shine from a direction on a glassy surface of a fingerprint that would reflect in this rainbowy iridescent reflection.
Interesting.
Or like zebra stripes, but transparent with iridescent reflection. And no matter how much you zoom in on any part of this image, it doesn't lose clarity. It's perfectly photorealistic. It does lighting perfectly well. Like it's literally as if there is a lamp somewhere, so like a single source of light or like a source of light that you can move, and the image always reflects in exactly the right direction. So it's like perfectly does lighting perfectly well.
Interesting. And just to keep with the like how far into the retreat, around when were you getting this type of effect?
So these effects initially appeared, as I said, like around day 7 or 8. I actually had some of these effects pretty early on, like around day 4.
Mhm.
But I didn't know that these were effects that I was supposed to be going for. So I was rather focusing on other stuff and forcing myself to go in other directions, because I thought that I was supposed to be going for brightness or some effects like that, like fully widescreen or stuff like that, because this is how I had interpreted what I had read in the book and like all the videos.
Yeah, and that's what what's her
I
name?
thought that
Shannon talks
yeah
about in that book. She talks about like expanding color to cover the entire field. So
and
yeah,
I thought that this is what I should do. So this is what I was trying to like get a full white out, which is like more a fourth jhana type, or like type effect, or something like that. When actually, because I thought that the screen was just the visual field. I thought that this was the screen, and then the numbering 1, 2, 3 refers to stages in temporal progression where characteristics of the screen become so different that you can call it a different screen. Whereas the screens here mean actually kind of a plane, where the nimitta is the first screen, then what's behind the nimitta is the second screen. And the third screen appears as the overlay on the third screen, where sometimes you can
the
have
overlay
the
on
third
which
screen
screen? The
on the
third is the over.
on the second screen. The
Okay.
third
Yeah.
screen is the overlay on the second screen, where sometimes you can, like, if you have this fingerprint translucence,
Mhm.
you can still have the second screen in the background doing what the second screen is doing, but on top of that you have this perfectly crispy, clear imagery of the third screen. And then you can
that's quite cool.
you can allow the second screen to fall in the background completely, so much that it's not prominent in your attention. I'm not sure. I didn't have enough experience with it to test if it's still there or if it's not there, or if it just acts as a background to the third screen, just like to provide kind of like a screen for the projection. I'm not sure, but definitely what the screens mean is kind of like an overlay on top of each other.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So I guess like something I'm interested in now is seeing to what extent I can place some other types of visuals. I'm curious as to what your understanding of them is. So while there's this thing we talked about of like photorealistic, but colors slightly off. And I think not on the last retreat, but the first one I got into like pretty much bang on colors, is particularly with rock faces. It's like my brain wanted to generate like cliff faces or something. But there's this other thing that was much more involvingly episodic and like fully three-dimensional, completely immersive with all the proprioceptive effects, where I might like I might notice something that looks almost like a portal in the air, and I would somehow go through that portal, and then this forest would be revealed, and then in the forest there'd be a monastery, and then I would my perspective would zoom into the monastery, and then I would see the monks there, and this wasn't photorealistic, but it was completely three-dimensional, and it was configured as reality. It was just like lacking some extra finish or something. But like some of that even had like, it literally looked like 3D models that hadn't been like fully skinned or something. yeah, so I'm curious, yeah, how you interpret that from your understanding.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, then that's all the second screen effect.
Really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, because third screen stuff should be completely realistic.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to
This
get
is
back
what
on
this is
retreat.
what I. Hmm?
Now I need to get back on retreat.
Yeah, exactly.
I need another, I don't know what it is, like 7 days or so. Then-
Yeah, I think to get to the third screen without getting too tired from everything else, I think you need to put in more hours, I guess. I think, yeah, the really interesting effects that I've heard about come from even 18 hours of practice a day, or like 16 hours of practice a day. So that's just maybe eating and
Yeah.
sleeping. They're eating and barely sleeping and practicing for the rest of the time. And I guess that's also probably challenging to maintain for during every day of the retreat.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely putting in more than 14 hours, or like putting in some good 14 hours of practice a day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. That's one thing that I learned as I fluctuated from something like 8 hours up to 12. And it's I would, that just has to be more if, yeah,